This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
It is that time to go straight into the weekly Power Boardroom Roundtable, and this evening, as I indicated, we are talking about labor rights when it comes to employees being allowed to take the time that they may need when it comes to cultural and traditional practices. Sometimes it means you are away in what they call in Western terms a sabbatical for a couple of months and even more. So do we have those allocations and an allowance in our dispensation as a South African labour landscape that allow us to have that particular time off that often is needed? I wonder what your experiences have been. I've had friends and colleagues in the media space where essentially at times it is not one that is documented that you take the sabbatical. Many others who have taken sabbaticals, they do so under a dispensation that is called unpaid leave. Is it something that you are comfortable with as a South African, especially when it comes to traditional customs and traditional practices that are not often recognized under labor law and labor dispensation in South Africa? This conversation really stems from a tweet and it is information that was shared on social media platforms by Cosatu's president Zingiswa Losi, sharing her journey as well as advocating for how we move as a country to get to a place where we say that this is allowed in law and this is confirmed in law that it is an allowance for a ordinary employee. Zingiswa Losi Cosatu president joins us on the line for this conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you to me, and thanks for having me, and I greet the listeners of Power FM.
Also part of this conversation is Siphiwe Moyo. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you so much, Tumisang, for having me.
Siphiwe Moyo represents the organizational behaviour. He is representing himself as an organizational behaviour specialist, and Mkhulu Nsingiza, a traditional healer and cultural activist, is also going to be part of this panel. Thank you for your time.
Thokoza Nkosi.
Siyathokoza ndlondle ezinhle.
Thokoza.
Sisli Zingiswa, I really want to start with you because what you posted, and I only picked up on this earlier on this week. I was quite encouraged, number one, that you are not only speaking as an individual, you are speaking as also the president of a big labour federation, a movement that represents workers. And in current day economics, labour landscape in South Africa, this is a conversation that we shy away from having. And the questions that you asked in the post are so important in that our counterparts call them a sabbatical, and we as cultural practitioners in the workspace, we do not have allowance to take time off to conduct this that may be needed by what the young ones called underground gang.
Thank you very much. Allow me to greet Mkhulu Nsingiza. Thokoza Mkhulu. Thokoza Mkhulu. And greet also Siphiwe Moyo. Ndiyabulisa nakuwe tata. Indeed, I always say I am grateful for the spiritual journey that I am still undergoing. It has opened my eyes to the realization of what we have been ignoring. I was never raised in that environment. I was raised in a Christian family. All these things were tabooed until, and I always say, lockdown came, Mkhulu Nsingiza, with many things. Yeah. It has opened us up. It has allowed our ancestors to really communicate with us. And I say, as much as we look at the negative parts, I always say, the lockdown is because it has allowed me to be still and to listen and to pay attention and to get the messages from Abantu Abadala.
Yeah.
And having realized that, I then realized that our Labour Relations Act, our Basic Conditions of Employment Act, has been westernized.
Oh, yeah.
We go as trade unions to negotiate every year or every 3 years for better working conditions, but ignore who we are as Africans. As a result of that, in the first aid kit, for an example, we are advocates as trade unions in the workplace for safety working environment. And what we look at is that a first aid kit must have all other medical equipment except for impepo, except for snake, except for what umntwana ethongo needs in order for her to deal with the ailments that come with ubizo. And I realized that in the workplace some have uniforms, but we have made it taboo for me to carry ibhayilam and dilinxibe, you know, when such a moment requires me to do so. In other workplaces, and I've seen this, Mkhulu Nsingiza, when I went for an investment conference in Senti.
Yes.
As I entered doing a registration, the recent one, and a lady that was welcoming us into the registration, and when she saw Ubuhlalu, and she said, "Thokoza gogo ngathokozisa." I think, you know what? I feel so naked where I'm standing. I was told to take off ubuhlalu bam because I would be offending people that are coming here.
You know, what you are saying resonates so much, and I really hope and trust that this conversation is going to open up even far more and demystify exactly this that you are saying, because ubuhlali bethu at times we keep it at home and then we wear the westernized clothes so that abantu bangaboni uba sihamba namathonga. And that's where I want to bring in Siphiwe here, because when Zingiswa talks about the issue of a first aid kit being available, but akosnaf, and there is no MPEP, or there is nothing else that is going to aid one who may need that type of apparel. How far behind are we in an African country that these things are not available?
I think it's not even far behind. Tumisang, it's non-existent at all. To be honest, I've been in the HR space for 20 years, and I'm ashamed to say, even as an HR person in corporate South Africa, there's no consciousness up until now to be able to change that, right? Because as the thing I was saying, you know. There's something that must happen first. Consciousness brings illumination and light, and therefore change comes. But at the moment, those conversations are not even had. So it's not even saying that we are behind. They are not had. And one of the problems is that many of us get into corporate South Africa and we assimilate to this culture, and no one says, wait, we are in South Africa. How should we be able to run this thing and do things the way we want to do them? So what we've taken the law, we've taken the Labour Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, as Zingiswa is saying, but we've also taken things that come with it that are actually not law at all.
I'm so glad that you are basically laying out the transparency that we all need to look straight in the face and say that it does not work for us, it's not tailor-made for us. And Mkhulu Nsingiza, what Ugogo Zingiswa was saying really is that in current day South Africa, we are not recognizing ourselves as Africans. What are we doing about it? Because this conversation that we are having right now on radio is not happening anywhere else.
No, I fully agree, Nendlovukazi. Ngibulise kubo bonke, you know, abamamele. I fully agree, Nendlovukazi. Injalo. Inkinga yethu or our problem is that we don't have an economic muscle, you know, in our own country. Remember that, you know, our problem is structural. Why? Because when we took over the country, we didn't change anything. We just took over, you know, everything that, you know, the colonizers, you know, constructed. So you cannot then expect that a Western influence system to actually accommodate, you know, an African, you know, philosophy and African culture as well. So I think our problem is structural. The only solution that, you know, we have is that we need to set up a parallel system. Because if we were to then control, as you know, African people in their African country, we are not in control of our economy. If we were in control of our economy, we own the industries especially, in communities where we reside. We need to industrialize those places so that our people don't come to town, for work. They work within there. And, black people will be able to actually accommodate all these things we're talking about, because it's not for the first time this issue, arises.
Comes up, yeah.
Every time it arises, somebody has got to go. Ayotwasa, something happened. Somebody, kuyenzakala ukuthi uzilile, can't come to work.
Yes.
So, white people won't be able to accommodate that because it's not in their nature, it's not in their culture, to experience something like this. So we need to gradually, work towards setting up a parallel system, because this is a well-entrenched system and there's nothing that we can do. Siyangenela kuyo. We need our own system.
It speaks to what Zakes on Twitter at Dlamini_Z21 is saying, that the Constitution accords both culture and religion equal recognition and protection. Section 9 of the Constitution prohibits the state from unfairly discriminating against anyone on religion. Unions should be enforcing this unapologetically so. Zingiswa, how do we respond then as a labor force? Because it seems as though we are still trying to force certain issues down the throats of corporate South Africa.
We have started this debate in the Cosatu National Bargaining Conference. When I opened the conference, I made this statement. And I'm glad that Cosatu, part of the resolutions that they have taken, is about this matter, that we agree that we need amendments. And using the Constitution, because there is no other law that supersedes the Constitution. And as the listener has put it quite correctly, that the Constitution protects all of us, in all our religion, all our cultures. But when it comes to the workplaces, so it then says, as what Mkhulu Nsingiza is saying, that what we have subjected ourselves to, we have closed our eyes into who we are and therefore accepted anything which is westernized, which is foreign from us. And until our consciousness also is awakened, and but this is who we are. Just like, and I was making an example. In the city, if I were to go to the airport and traveling, and I always carry isnaf nebai and all of them. But would I be allowed to go to the prayer room there? It's only for Muslim community.
Would
I be allowed?
We don't have our own spaces.
No.
So I feel we need to challenge this, not just by waiting for us to pass laws and amend laws, but we need to say, because the Constitution, and use the Constitution as the basis of the implementation of that law.
That we too are protected.
Yes, because we are protected. So if we're going to negotiate, we must not negotiate an obani.
So
because if we negotiate for what we are already been given, are we not starting from a weak point? Instead of saying nothing does now, we protect you already now, so it's full implementation of the Constitution, because there can never be a law that undermines the Constitution. So the Constitution takes supreme, it becomes the supreme law if unenye umthetho who is less favorable than the Constitution.
Siphiwe, let me bring you back into this one, because what has been said about an example that is of an airport where there is a specific room for a particular religious group, and even in workplaces. If I, for whatever reason, and I'm having a moment and I need to light take my snuff, use water and a candle, currently, we don't have such things. So what is it that needs to be done? Because if the Constitution is a protection for all of us, therefore, labor law should be speaking towards that too.
I think it should. But I'm of the view, to be honest with you, that I don't think there's already has been a pushback from the workplace to discuss these things. I had a privilege of being a president of the HR professional body for 6 years, up until about a year ago, and I have never seen a a kind of proposal like this being declined. So if you look at every workplace, they will have an employment equity forum. They will have collective bargaining, as Zingiswa has been saying. The way we have not brought this consciousness and discussion, and we have not been defeated, And I guess I agree with Mkhulu Nsingiza. There has to be another parallel system, maybe in advance. But my argument is, I don't think we've pushed enough and conscientized our current organizations to understand this matter. Even for abantu abamnyama in corporate South Africa, in HR spaces and so on, who have also been conscientized to believe that everything Western is the right way. We have not had conversations around saying, why is it wrong and go and do impepho? So I am not convinced that organizations have rejected this. I just think the conversation up until now has not actually happened the way it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and Mkhulu, for you, because if wena as a traditional healer and a cultural activist who has been advocating for such, in that this type of conversation is not brought onto the boardroom table as much as kicking other doors, looking for barriers to entry that we are going to diminish than monetary gains or having access to employment, which form part of the unequalness that we are trying to address in a South African economy. This one means that we are basically very quiet about it.
No, we are very quiet, about a lot of things. I'll make an example. As an example, we have our African calendar, which the year starts on the 23rd of September. And we've been pushing this, and Umamwini, 24 years ago, launched this calendar so that we realigned and, affirm our position in our own country. But government, we've been knocking there until today. And another thing, when it comes to the New Year of the Jewish people, the New Year of the Muslim, it's a paid holiday. They don't go to work. And the Nababanda Bamnyama deserve the very same thing. So these are the things that we are trying to push, so that, the government must listen, and we are hoping that, in Dlovukazi, and the unions can actually back us up, because that's the leverage we need to actually communicate in the government, because there's no reason why government is still pushing this Western philosophy on us. Like the calendar, it's Christmas here,
yes.
But it's Christmas of the northern hemisphere. We are on the southern hemisphere. They are in winter, we are in summer. But everybody is supporting with all the resources, the western or the northern hemisphere Christmas. When it comes to our Christmas in June, nobody says anything. When it comes to our New Year in September, nobody says anything. And because our calendar reflects what happens in the environment, it reflects nature. So September, you can see everything starts greening. So everything that, it's like it's a China trying to convert the Chinese to adopt an African culture. So these are the things that, the government yet is failing us. Because, these are the things that must be promoted. They are aligning, they are aligned with nature, they are aligned with the core of our being. So, there's so much that we still need to do, especially in terms of consciousness. In 94, we're supposed to then, promote this African-centered, consciousness. But because of, the Western culture pays the bill, everybody has got to adopt the Western culture for them to put food on the table. And in that process, we are losing our being.
And Mkhulu, I want to challenge you on that one, because we as African individuals have a role to play in that. When you speak about the time that we are going into on the Western calendar, it is Christmas time. But as black individuals, when siyagoduka, siyayehla, we do very different things and cultural practices during this time of the Western calendar. But at the same time, we are seen to be pro-Western calendar as opposed to what it is that we are going down Masietla to do, because this is a time of a year where we are going to be ushering in another brand new year. We do a lot of things, including cleansing as well as ukuyek into ezmuva from the previous year, but we hardly even in a social discourse discuss that. So how do we even bring it to a boardroom when you are so terrified of speaking about what it is that you were doing back home over the December and coming to your colleagues and saying, I'm strong this year, let's go?
Yes, we are doing it, and because we've been socialized to do that. It's something that goes against our nature. Remember, Gucci, sorry, when the new, dispensation came, there's nothing that fundamentally changed, in terms of giving African people in their own country a foundation, a correct foundation. As an example, anybody that, determines the time for you, that person, controls it consciously. So we need to liberate, our calendars, because it's a calendar that we used to use, before colonizers came here. You can ask anybody in their African language, what does the September mean? It means that we're starting a new cycle. So we have been socialized and we have normalized the colonization. So these are the things that we need to launch a program of decolonization so that abantu abamnyama clearly return to their identity and culture, so that we are able to fully express who we are as African people. Yeah. So manje everything is siyangenela uzwa, it has become a culture yethu to celebrate Christmas nabantu base northern hemisphere. It's not supposed to be like that, because we're supposed to align with the natural flow of the energy of the southern hemisphere.
Yeah. I really hate to say that we still have a long way to go, but unfortunately we do. We continue with this conversation where we are talking about labor rights. It is a part of our Power Boardroom segment, talking about decolonizing the HR practices when it comes to transformation, to realizing our African identity, practices, cultures, and being allowed to do so unapologetically so in the current dispensation of a South African economy. 7:30.
Call Power Business on 0861 987 000.
Indeed, that's the number to call us on 7:33. We continue with our Power Boardroom Roundtable conversation, talking about the decolonization of HR practices to accommodate African culture. Zakele is calling us from Centurion to add to this conversation. Good evening, Zakele.
Good evening, Tumisang. How are you?
I'm well. Awusafoni kutheni na Zakele?
Oh, you've just read my tweet. We want
to hear from you. What's your opinion on this one?
Look, this is a very interesting, especially coming to the workplace, of which I'm also practicing within. And I still feel like the unions have the powers, but they're not doing enough. And when one will wonder, why are they not doing enough? I think back in 2007, 2008, when I arrived in the mining industry in Rustenburg, we once challenged this under 2NUM and Obabu Vavi, who are still heading the organization way back,
at the time,
to say as long as the union's officials, our representatives, are being paid through the employer salary, there's nothing that we can challenge into the boardroom where this HR officials sit in and come out with. Why can't they be paid by our subscription? Because these unions are being paid millions and millions through the subscription of the members. Clearly and definitely, they can survive with those salaries. And once they can do that, they can able to be robust, direct, unapologetic to the employers. Because that is what is killing us. It's not that there are no laws. The land that I've just given you in shape of the Constitution is there. They can't tell me they never revisited. They have revisited it at some point in time. But the thing is, how did then the negotiations end up in deadlock? Because the employer is always having the upper bargaining hand because it's paying the salaries. As long as we're aligning that system, we will never change the workplace. We will never change the workplace.
Thank
because
you as always.
Unions are the ones to change it.
Thank you so much for that question. Always challenging us, Upudzakele, and as the president of Cosatu, let me bring you in, Zingiswa, on this one, because it really reminds me and takes me back to the Marikana strike a couple of years ago in South Africa, where African culture was seen somewhat as taboo, demonic, and all sorts of things. And what Budzakele is raising is that even at negotiation table, when we are seen as demonized for the practices that we are accustomed to, even when we are in strike action mode, how are those then not lobbied for in that, no, please understand this process and may it not form part of what it is that we are discussing at a labor level where we are discussing money as well?
Thank you very much, Tumi, again, and Nopudzakele. At the level of the bargaining structures, I know the sectors are different, but in principle, these are issues, and I agree with Mkhulu Moyo that we have not pushed as trade unions that far. And I think we still have the space. And I want to make reference to a court decision of the Supreme Court of Appeal. We case of Kivitz Kroon Country Estate versus Umoleti in 2013, November. Here is a chef who had to go ukuthwasa. He took a leave yeviki. 1 week leave they gave him. He extended the leave because ukuthwasa 1 week only. The employer, while he is ukuthwasa, called and said, you must come back to work because we have denied an extension of your leave. He refused and said, I can't because of the importance of the initiation that I must go through. And upon his return, he was dismissed. He took his case to the CCMA and to the Labour Court. He was granted that his dismissal was unfair. The employer appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal. The employer lost the case. So the worker won. What we did not do, and I want to admit this, what we did not do, as Moyo is saying, as trade unions, we did not use that given Kroon case
as precedent
because it is law already. It is law. It is law. It is a Supreme Court of Appeal judgment, and there is no other judgment that has reversed it. So it means it becomes law. What we did not do is to use it to enforce that law for not for certain companies, because the mistake that we would want to make is to leave it to sectors to make that discussion in their sectoral bargaining structures. But if we allow it to be incorporated in the basic conditions of employment, we don't need to create a law. There's a law already through this judgment. What we need to do as trade unions is to say there is a law and this must go into the Basic Conditions of Employment Act as an addition to what already exists there, so that we don't start negotiating what is already given to us. But I agree, we have not pushed on these matters. So we can't say they have been denied, but I think we have not done enough as trade unions.
Mweketsin van der Bijlpark, good evening, sir.
Kgotso mme re kae?
Re tsogile raitsho la gago lefoko le reng?
La ka lefoko mma ke re ke dumedise ba gaetso mo studio ba nang le wena. Ha ke phaola ke re I think re ke nako dipolelo tse tshwanetse re di dire in our own community. Ke ira se ke bela Setswana ka pontsho Sotho because a ke nyaka go bolela sejatlhapi. Ko ke yona puo e tlosang borena ba rena. Re se mo re sa tsebeng teng. Now I think ntho le belang today a ke nyaka gore ke problem ya Cosatu, ke problem ya trade, ke problem ya government. I think ke problem ya rena as batho ba bantsho. E tla beng re ithome re dire re se ka e bolela. Because ha re bolela re sa e dire I tlo tswela mosola.
Absolutely.
It can even build the coming generation. Baneng ba go rona. Ngare mar if rona re ira mo re phelang teng mo re rapelang teng within our own families ntwe e ka gola bana ba rona ba ira.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Abud Mweketsi, because what you are saying makes absolute sense in that it is really up to us to change this narrative that once our children get into the workspace and they come with our cultural practices from home, they don't need to hide like we do. Mkhulu. We are still hiding. And I would not want my child to come into a workspace where they would have to not talk about certain things. If they feel unsafe and they say, I dreamt of such and such, and this is what I'm seeing from a colleague, but I can't go to HR with this because it sounds fictitious, then it means we are perpetuating a culture of not being conscious. How do we change this narrative? Yes, we have conversations. Yes, we are moving slightly at snail's pace, but we are still not at a point where we are building for the next generation of an employable South Africa that's going to come into a workplace and have these discussions where it is not shameful.
Yes, because Lentole it's not only, in the workplace, even in our communities, some people still shy away from identifying with their Africanness. When you appear Ufagamapai, already other black people in the community are then, giving you labels that, Petwa Matimoni and all those things. So we need, it must be a national program of decolonization so that we go back to being normal again. Okwamanje siyagula as a nation. And we need to heal ourselves, because the way we behave, the way we do things, it's very, very abnormal. You would not go to China or Israel and find the Jewish people or the Chinese people practicing their culture, but, looking down upon the people that are practicing that culture. There's only one culture in China, which is the Chinese culture. So here in South Africa, there should be an African culture. Then we accommodate all other people that are from outside. So here, the way things are, it's the other way around. It's like African culture is accommodated within a Western, construct. That is why we find ourselves in this position, which is why I say the long-term solution, we've got to come up with a parallel system, that will be started right from the scratch. It must be African-centered. In that way, we will find full expression of who we are as African people.
Absolutely. Siphiwe, let me bring you back into this conversation. At the beginning of this discussion, when I began and opened the platform to Zingiswa, she mentioned something very important about what COVID-19 lockdown meant for many of us. It meant that we are home, we become still, we are within our thoughts. I mean, you don't have the in-between of rushing to work and therefore you are running away from certain issues that you need to confront within your life. And in the HR practice, the mental stability and mental issues, dealing with mental issues that affect employees, we've come a long way, but it took us a number of years to get to where we are starting to be comfortable with dealing with those matters within an employment space. So with this particular discussion where we are talking about African customs, African practices, do we even have space for the HR world to say, we don't need an advocacy? We need to set it up ourselves, because with the mental illness type of situation, again, it became that issue of advocacy groups knocking continuously on the door and not backing down to say, this speaks to productivity levels. This also speaks to the HR practice abiding to the health of the employee.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. Even the issue of employee wellness took a long time for organizations to take it seriously. And even when we started taking it seriously, as Dr. Mkhulunsingiza was saying, it was the Western cultures, the employment assistance program. So we have things that are called EAPs, employee assistance programs, and the kind of things that are recommended in the employee assistance programs. there will be psychologists and everybody who is trained in the Western way. But eventually it happened, right? So Uguti, we then took employee wellness seriously. What I'm saying, Mina Manje, is that I think the ground is really fertile. Even 3 years ago, me Nangogwami, and I must not make myself as if I've always been conscious of these things. Even 3 years ago, as someone who grew up in a Christian environment, even me as an HR guy would frown upon some of the things that I'm like, no, maybe we shouldn't, So, but now there's a bit of a consciousness that has changed. Our own black people, including me, are starting to say, why were we told all the things that we know are bad and everything else that we've imported is good? So the ground is really, really fertile. There's progress that has been made in the mind first, because and so even the HR people that we speak, we when we speak in our own circles, we know that the ground is fertile, but we still need help, to be honest with you, because most of the things we might not really understand on how to package them and discuss them properly, and that's why I say the door has been opened. We need to talk. We need to be able to take this kind of conversation forward. But if this conversation was happening 3-4 years ago, you would probably have more resistance than you would have now.
Absolutely. And the danger about what you are saying, Siphiwe, in that we were somewhat taught of a narrative that many things that are of cultural practices are wrong. We run the risk of not even recognizing this that is dangerous to us because we lack awareness. Walter in Johannesburg, good evening.
Good evening, Tumisang. Thank you so much for such a good topic. I'd just like to give my comment as well.
Yes, sir.
On how basically the way we have adopted Western culture, that we've taken Western religion, which is, in my opinion, Christianity, which is truly not an African religion, because the Bible speaks of ancestors, which are white people who belong in the Arabic areas and the Middle East, whereas now we've turned our back from what is true to ourselves, that it has manifested through our workplace, that you'd go to a workplace, you'd meet a fellow Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, who'd rather speak English than speak their own language. And that's where it starts. And I'd just like to put that point out there as well.
Akunzima, but Walter, we have a lot of growing up to do, even as grown as we are. And Zingiswa said it when you mentioned that at the recent investment summit, but you are still, at that moment, you felt a bit bare and naked to maybe the lurking eyes. Let's go deeper into that conversation to talk about really the mindset change. It sounds like it's something that would be easy, but to be honest, it is not. So how do we then do that? Because if I myself as a Tumisang would not be confident in public, or even to those who are close to me within a social setting or a very serious business meeting, I am not going to be able to advocate for my own rights.
To me,
Zingiswa, how then do we correct that? Because again, there's an English term called the imposter syndrome. When one maybe is brilliant at what they do, but they also have that deeper intuition of being fearful, of anxiety. How do we remove that? Because saying that a mindset change is necessary, but there's a behavioral change that we need to fundamentally break, and it dates back to very long years of history in South Africa, where we are told that we're not good enough, we are bad, we are not all right in our practices.
I've understood nothing. Once you have that spiritual awakening, and because it's your personal journey, you know what you have gone through, you know what you are going through, and no one else can tell you otherwise. So therefore, why must you be apologetic for all the experiences that you have gone through? and that is why I always say na where ibhayi lakho where ubuhlali bakho, and let abantu stay, you know. Akukho nto uzawuphuma yona nabo kungekho nto bazophuma yona. So you accept me for who I am, or else you move on. Sometimes siyatsho sithi abantu abadala bayakwazi ukususa ebantwini ngendlela ethile, you know. So why must I be apologetic? I've said mna ukuthi in the journey that I'm at, Mkhulu, I would not take off ubuhlalu bami for anyone.
Oh yeah.
Ndiyabufaka busezinyaweni busezandleni busentanyeni, you know. And ibhayi lami ndihamba nalo, and if ngifuna ukulifaka, it does not matter where I am, even in the offices the Cosatu house, even if I'm doing an interview, I would be wearing ubuhlalu bami because ngimamela abantu abadala ukuthi bathini na, you know. And that's who I am. That's who I am. So until we stop being apologetic for abantwana bedlozi abakulendlela, until we stop being apologetic ukuthi abantu bazawuthini. As I've said, I was raised in a very Christian family, you know. Ecaweni lezinto zenziwa abantu abadala bathini na. And I remember my father when I said I've got this experience, and you know, parents always knew ukhula ukuthi Mkhulu ungumntwana wembisiwe. But because of indlela abafakwe kuyo bona okanye abakhuliswe ngayo, they don't talk to these things to us, but abantu abadala they communicate kunye nathi. And then ukuthi no, you need umthandazo, you need umthandazo, you need umthandazo. We don't have a problem umthandazo, but
not at all.
There's a journey that I need to go through, and it does not. I phikisani kunye nomthandazo. So until we say, even nasesontweni, if you can't accept me ngohlobo endililo, then it means I don't belong there. So why must I force myself? So until you take pride and stop being apologetic and start having this discussion. And for him now, I was also saying to me that abantwana bethu ezikolweni kunabantwana abagcotshiwe. Ufumanisa ukuthi umntwana esikolweni, you know, these white model schools, abantwana bethu, they are subjected to psychiatry, social workers,
medication even.
They get medication, kuthiwa either you're a slow learner or awuhlali kahle umntwana. And umntwana gets to be degraded, and kuthiwa kuye, no, you need to repeat. But we are not checking ukuthi ekhaya yini ehlupha umntwana, slowly ufumanisa ukuthi yintoni ehlupha umntwana. Kanti this is a very brilliant child, akunanto agula yiyo, but because we want to say if also, then it means ngoko-Western medicine unida lena into, and we feed abantwana bethu medication that they're not supposed to be getting, you know.
Sibabhudisa abantwana.
Exactly. Nasezikolweni, izikolo are workplaces, but at the same time, it is not just about a teacher, it is also about umntwana osesikolweni. What would teachers have to do when they deal with umntwana owembathisiwe? Do they know what to do? Do they know what is expected of them? Okanye sithi abantwana sifonela umzali sithi zola umntwana wakho uwile. Thina simazi ukuthi uwiswe yintoni nalo umntwana uhlala esiwa kungcono nimhlalise ekhaya angazi esikolweni.
Yeah, that one hurts a lot. Let's take a call from Petunia on the road in Midrand. Good evening.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm well, and you, Mama?
I'm good, thanks. I think it's such an important topic, the one that you're having, because I had an experience just a few months ago where I'm literally trying to go home to go pasha because, well, things need to be done. And there was just no way to say to HR, like, what do you say? Even when you're typing on the email, it doesn't even pick up your words. So you just end up coming up with a story like, oh, my friend is sick or my sister is sick, just so you can get home. But I also think also on the issue, there's a guy that touched on the issue of we get to work and then we start speaking English. You also need to understand that there's still tribalism as well. Like, for example, I'm Venda. I get there. I start speaking in Venda. I get some weird connotation from other black people. So I'd rather just get there and speak in English altogether instead of having other black people looking down on me because of my tribe.
Oh, Kadzi, you know, we live in a very, very tough dispensation still where we must fight all the time. I wish you all the best, really, and take on those challenges. Find the words to write that email and explain exactly what it is that you are trying to say. And sometimes they'll have to find a friend in the HR department who maybe is of African culture to interpret. Siphiwe, am I being wrong here in that when we do type those emails, we find ourselves even having to lie? And that's wrong.
It is wrong. It is wrong. But
I think just to being able to have that kind of a person in HR that you can just tell the truth is absolutely critical. But I'm struggling with it's about understanding, and I love that comment because all of a sudden, if you just speak in Chivenda and then there's someone else who's rolling their eyes and it's just so complicated. Maybe the departure point for me is that black people obviously are not homogeneous, right? So you still have black people who are saying, I really do not believe ukuthwasa and so on and so forth. But what we need to do is that although a few years ago I would not be an ally and I would be a person who also tries to block that because I just don't get it. Now, while we've come to a point where many of us are like, no, even if I stick to my Gawe or Isonto, suddenly now I'm getting into Muntu Namadimoni when they're trying to do their own thing. So something has shifted, and what we just need now is that consciousness to bring it into the diversity program. So every organization has a diversity program, but until now, that diversity program itself was colonized. So even the content of that diversity program was not speaking to these issues. I'm looking forward to a time, and I think many of us must initiate this. When we have our next conference, I'm getting ideas. With our next HR conference, we must get someone like Mkhulu Nsingiza to just come and educate us, come and speak, give you a platform and say, if we're putting together this diversity program, how should we talk about something like an African calendar, which, by the way,
I'm going to join you on that one. Mkhulu Nsingiza, before we let you go, I know you have to dash, and apologies for taking too much of your time when we are cognizant that you had to go. A parting shot, really, there was a comment around collaboration and having this inclusive conversation where we start going into corporate spaces and saying, this is who we are, this is what your diversity program is supposed to be looking like, so that we form a framework.
Look, e-cooperation yabantu abamnyama, or even a corporate, not even abantu abamnyama, but people who have a vested interest, in the continent and its culture and everything. We need to cooperate. Like in the calendar, mele ingene kuzo zonke ikolo. It must be in schools, it must be in every institution, even in government itself. We should be hanging our calendar there, not the calendar which is influenced by the Northerners. So cooperation, I would really love that, and I'm available anytime for me to come and explain, this calendar, because this is the calendar we used to use before colonizers came here.
Siyathokoza Mkhulu, all the best to you. Gavin Emmanuel, you are our last caller. I'm glad to be taking this call. Dumela.
Because at the end of the day, when you write an email to your superiors, you need to specifically tell them that you're going to do this to appease your ancestors. They will never and go to their psychics and stuff. And I think this issue, it should be involved with the culture or something, because it should be an issue that we as Africans, we do certain things that are done as Africans. I mean, and stuff, but we do them. You understand what I'm saying?
We need space to be doing our own things, Gavin, and I agree with you. Due to the lack of time, we'll have to end it there. We don't sleep at night, and we are troubled by a lot of things, but we can't say them in the workplace, and that's why I took your call. Thank you so much to Mkhulu Nsingiza, as well as Siphiwe Moyo, Zingiswa Losi Cosatu. Thank you so much, and we wish you all the best. That's how we end the Power Boardroom Roundtable segment this evening, talking about the decolonization of HR practices to accommodate African realities, issues that we deal with in practical life, as well as our social settings.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.